and I will now read the Laughing Bird Psalm 138. Thank you, Lord, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I will stand and sing your praises in the face of every would-be God. Wherever I am, I turn towards your holy temple and fall on my knees in gratitude, thanking you for your rock-solid love and loyalty with everything you say and everything you do. Your reputation continues to go through the roof. The minute I called, you were there for me. You put steel in my spine and gave me the guts to go on. When the things you have been saying sink in, Lord, all the earth's powerful rulers will give credit to you. They'll join the party, singing and dancing in your honor, celebrating the wonderful things you do. As great as you are, you never think of ordinary people as beneath you, and you don't waste your time on those who are pretentious and stuck up. Although I must often walk in dangerous situations, you protect me from hatred and hostility. Your invisible hand is always there, keeping me safe. You, Lord, have made plans for me, and you will see them through to completion. Your love is timeless and dependable as the rock. You have made us what we are, and you never give up on us. And from 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 through 22. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us a king to govern us, like other nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, just as they have done to me from the day I brought them out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel reported all of the words of the king to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will rule over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war, and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards, and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards, and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves, and the best of your cattle and donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you will be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you on that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard these words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and set a king over them." Samuel then said to the people of Israel, "Each of you return home."
Sometimes the church needs to be reminded that God has blessed us with the gift of free will and free choice. It's part of the beauty of being a human being. In the Bible, Genesis 2, the writer tells the story of how God placed humans in the garden called Eden so that they will till and keep it. God also told the humans, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." And so for a time, things went really well in that Garden of Eden. But then along comes this serpent. And the serpent says, "You know, the only reason God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is that if you do, you will become like God." Now notice, the serpent did not force them to eat the fruit from the tree. There's not, what was that old thing that Flip Wilson used to say? The devil made me do it. Serpent didn't make these people do anything. The serpent simply said, "Listen, you can eat from the fruit of the tree if you want, because why would God put that tree in the garden in the first place anyway, right? You were the stewards of this garden, correct? Okay, well, if you were the stewards of this garden, if you want to eat the fruit, go ahead. Looks yummy, doesn't it?" And the humans ate it, even though God told them not to. And God confronted them. God said, "Didn't I tell you not to eat from that tree?" And the humans said, "Yes." God said, "Then why did you eat from the tree?" And of course, the humans started pointing fingers and blaming each other. The woman said, "The serpent made me do it." And the man said, "The woman you gave me made me do it." And they were exiled from the garden, probably still blaming each other on the way out. "You made me do it." "Yeah, she did. She made me do it." "Your fault." "No, it's your fault." This is the story that my Sunday school teacher, Greg Johnson, referred to when any of his students asked, "Why didn't God just create humans to always do the right thing?" Because being able to choose right from wrong is what makes us human. It sets us apart from all other creatures in creation. Free choice is necessary to be fully human. So last week we were introduced to the prophet Samuel, who was the surrogate son of Eli, who was one of Israel's judges. And at the time, Israel was this federation of 12 tribes who had an odd way of governing themselves, at least when you compare them to other nations in that time and place in the world. Eli was having a hard time governing, in part because his two sons were misusing the power that came along with being children of one of Israel's judges. Eli was also going blind, and he was having a hard time just dealing with the problems that were coming up in his own life. So, Samuel, at the tender age of about, scholars say maybe 12 years old, was called by God to be a prophet. And the first thing he was told to do was to tell his surrogate father Eli that God was going to bring down his house, thus ending his term as judge in Israel. What a way to start a job, right? I, at the tender age of 31, accepted a call to be the associate regional minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Virginia. It became my job to flip our region's camp around so that it would make a profit rather than be in a deficit, as it had been for 15 years before that. I was also told to rein in the high school age camp in Virginia because over the years it had gotten out of control and churches started withdrawing their support from the region because, and I quote, "Our congregations are not happy that many of the campers they send to church camp come back reporting that they had their first cigarette or first drink," and some other things I won't even mention in church. I was also called to provide staff support to the regional clergy committee, where I had to watch a person that I went to college and seminary with lose their standing for an ethics violation. Easy job, right? But listen, my challenges were minuscule compared to the prophet Samuel. The final verse of our scripture last week was, "As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground." He earned Israel's trust. His occupation went from being a 12-year-old fledgling prophet who witnessed the downfall of Eli to this strange combination of priest, prophet, and judge. And to this day, Samuel is recognized in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as being one of the greatest prophets who ever lived. But talk about somebody who had problems. Good grief. It took me about 3 years to turn the camp around in Virginia. Samuel's task, this is what Samuel had to do. He had to defeat the Philistines. He had to get the Ark of the Covenant back from those who stole the Ark of the Covenant, and he had to establish peace in Israel. Took him about 20 years, but then things started to go south. Over time, Samuel realized that it was a lot of work holding down basically 3 different jobs. And so he said, well, I'm just going to appoint 2 of my sons, my 2 sons, to be judges. Because I'm just getting too old for that job. Besides, these are my kids. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it happened, Samuel's sons were yahoos, just like Eli's sons. And I'm sure Samuel didn't appreciate the irony that he didn't have any more control over his sons than his old Eli mentor had over his. And guess who wasn't happy about Samuel's sons being yahoos? The people of Israel. What is this thing about holding leaders responsible for their kids' sins? I mean, a good thing we don't do that anymore, right? But in this case, I get it. I understand where Israel's coming from. I see their point. Samuel had actually appointed his kids to be judges, and those kids' poor choices, and thus also Samuel's, had a direct impact on Israel's safety. So, Israel's tribal leaders got together, and they came up with a plan for how they wanted to be governed. They concluded that Samuel should appoint a king. Now, the problem is the law of Moses was very explicit in saying that there's only one king, and that king is God and God alone. That's the way it was designed to be. There was no other way around that. God was the only king of Israel, and it was the judges who were to carry out the king's command. But Israel decided that wasn't working out the way they wanted it to, so they demanded a king. This last week, I had my granddaughter here. She's so cute. And she was sitting at Cozy Diner one day, and she was doing this. And it was funny. She had this huge smile on her face, and I said, I want to see the manager. And all week, that was my thing. To the Cameron, just, would you quit teaching her how to be a Karen? And I'm like, listen, this is fun. So she goes, I want to see the manager. And she'd laugh. That's the way Israel was right here. I want a king. Right now, I want a king. Why? Verse 19 and 20 tells us that. The tribal leaders said, we are determined to have a king over us so that we may be like all the other nations. Why do human beings think that the grass is always greener on the other side of the border? I mean, you may have this perfectly good, tried and true way of governing, but the minute you face a challenge, it's, oh, look at that dictator over there. Wow, he doesn't let his people get away with any kind of dissent. He keeps them in line. We should be like him. And that's what was happening here in Israel. God told Samuel to tell the people what a disastrous idea that their plan for having a king would be. Because human kings are corruptible. A human king will take away your sons from you and from your household so that they could go out and fight their battles. He'll take your daughters away to care for the armies. He'll take your crops and your herds from you so that he can build his empire. And then he'll start giving all of his friends and his family special privileges. And then you're going to have this oligarchy where the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer, and you'll end up with a nation that is irreparably polarized, and then you'll be the target for every empire in the region. Don't do it. In the book of Deuteronomy, Moses told the people of Israel, see, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him and holding fast to him, for that means life to you and length of days, so that you may live in the land that the Lord swore to give to your ancestors. So Samuel did his best to remind the tribal leaders how disastrous it would be to have a king. But the leaders rejected him and said, I want a king. They'd say, you know, we can make this work. We can make this work. We want a king. We'll be different. We'll be different than all the rest of these nations. And you know what God said despite Samuel's protests? God said, all right, let them have a king. It's their choice. What? You got to be kidding. That's not the way it's supposed to work. You need to intervene, God. They'll screw this up. No, it's their choice. That must have been difficult, maybe even painful for Samuel to hear. I wonder if he thought, oh my gosh, this is my fault for appointing my sons to be judges. If only I had seen the red flag ahead of me. If only I had reined those kids in before they let things get so bad. But this isn't an unusual problem for parents. No matter how hard we've worked to raise our kids to have a good moral foundation, sometimes they just choose the path of the Yahoo. Think about how many stories, how many parables, how many plays and books and movies and stage productions are all about kids who have rebelled or brought shame to their family because they made bad choices, even if they were raised to make good choices. Again, free will is necessary to be human. What does it take for a church to be prophetic? That's the question that started this whole series out. And so far, the answer to that question is a lot. It takes a lot to be a prophetic voice in this world. I empathize with Samuel. What was it like to be a prophet, constantly mediating between God and God's people, to be a representative of the people for God and to speak on their behalf, to remind people that it was God who saved them from slavery and bondage? It must have been exhausting. For generations, God had promised the people that God would be the people's king, the center of their universe, their protector, their king. And now the people started looking to other nations who had kings, and they felt like they were missing out. And so the people complained, they protested, they pleaded, they whined, they hit the table. They argued with Samuel that a king was necessary to govern them. And God responded by saying, okay. For some reason, many churches in this era of history today, and I'm not just saying here in our country, but around the world, feel that to be faithful to their calling, they have to take away choices from people by gaining control over certain aspects of their lives. Rather than spreading the gospel, the good news, through service and love, as Jesus taught, they seek to impose it by force. There is a movement taking place in some Christian circles these days called the Seven Mountain Mandate. And the Seven Mountain Mandate believes that the best way to introduce people to the good news of Jesus is by taking control of 7 aspects of society: family, religion, education, media, arts, business, and government. And you might say, wow, that's actually sounds like a good idea. But then people scratch their heads and says, but wait, that also sounds like what happened back in the 70s when fundamentalist Muslim clerics took control of Iran. Well, yeah, sure does. Also sounds like what fundamentalist Buddhists did in Myanmar. And the list goes on. Plenty of examples of that. Nothing good ever comes out of that kind of evangelism. Shoot, we should have learned that lesson from Emperor Constantine of Rome, who replaced the Word of God with a sword and shield. And then, when anybody pushes back or anybody reminds them that free will and choice is a part of God's design, part of God's plan, people say, oh, we're being persecuted because of our religion. Folks, let us remember that religious persecution is when you are prevented from exercising your beliefs, not when you are prevented from imposing your beliefs. Would the world be a better place if you could make people do things? Would life be easier if people all made the same good choices? Yeah. Are some of the choices good? No. They may be destructive to the person making them. But so long as those choices don't infringe upon the rights and safety of others, it's still a part of God's design that the ability to choose is there. As always, this all sounds good on paper, but using the Bible as a club never works. And it ends up undermining God's message of love. Samuel Shoot, he's just getting started. Let me tell you, we're in for a ride here. He's going to have his hands full. God said, let them have a king. And they did, and things blew up right out of the gate. But God can redeem anything. God works with us to return us to God and redeem things. That's the beauty of having free will. And we would do well to remember that as individuals, as a church, and as a nation. Again, buckle up for next week. Whew. Let's see what happens when that king comes to power.